In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So God willing, we're going to discuss First Maccabees, chapters 8 and 9. Does anyone want to recap what we talked about last week? Chapter 6 and 7. There's a lot of things that happened. Does anyone remember anything that happened?
I remember one thing.
What?
At the end, there was a new king.
Yes, so
Antiochus.
yes, so Antiochus, who was the king all throughout the story so far, since the very beginning of the book. Okay, what happened to him?
He died.
Yes, how did that happen? How did he die?
A war.
From sorrow?
I took a war.
A war?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, kind of.
He was really sick because he lost all his spoils and things of that nature, and it made him broken heart sort of.
Yes, okay. So that's Antiochus the Fourth, right? Antiochus the Fourth, okay? Then what happened? So who is Demetrius? Do you remember this name, Demetrius?
You can.
Yes, he is a new king. Where did he come from? So first of all, who became the king after Antiochus the Fourth? His son, Antiochus the Fifth, okay? Then what happened after that? There was a man named Demetrius. He was a prisoner in Rome, okay? And he was who?
Who was supposed to be the king?
Yes, he was actually the rightful king, okay? Because before Antiochus the Fourth became king, this man Demetrius, his father was the king. And so he was supposed to be the king after his father, not Antiochus the Fourth, okay? So Demetrius, he was a prisoner in Rome. He came out of Rome, and then he what? He took the throne, and he killed who?
Antiochus the Fifth.
He killed Antiochus the Fifth, right? Who was his cousin, okay? And someone else.
His advisor.
Lysias, okay? Okay, good. And then we read in chapter 7, there was yet another big battle, okay? And the kind of the person who the king had sent in charge of that battle, his name was Nicanor. And essentially in the end, like after this big battle, the Jews were victorious. And then we read at the very end of chapter 7, and the land of Judah was quieted for a brief time. So like after they won, okay, and they killed Nicanor and they took the spoils of the battle, the people were rejoicing, and there was like a brief kind of peace, okay, in Israel. Any questions before we? Yes.
I have a question about chapter 7.
Yeah.
It seems like Judas won a lot of battles for the Israelites to protect them. He recovered the temple and the altar, and he did a lot of things for the Israelites. But it shows here that men from Israel, they went to the king and told him, Judas and his brother destroys all your friends, and they will fight him. I wonder why.
This is the group of the Israelites that's not faithful, okay, to the Jewish faith, and they want to be assimilated to the Gentiles and to be Hellenized and adopt the Greek culture. So they went to the Greeks, or sorry, in this case it's to the
king.
Demetrius. Okay, yeah, actually as Greek. They went to him and they essentially said everything related to the Greeks he's destroying, right?
Yeah.
Everything that Antiochus had set up related to Greek culture and the stadiums and all the stuff with preventing circumcision, Judas is undoing all of that. So when he's saying that as a person who is not faithful to the Jewish culture and wants to adopt the Greek culture. Right, so he's a traitor.
But they're not either traitors.
He's a traitor.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's continue with chapter 8. Okay. And Judas, okay, so now again, so the very first part of the book of Maccabees was all focusing on what was happening internally in Israel, right? There was the family of the Maccabees, there was the invasion, okay, by Antiochus the Fourth, okay, and all the internal battles and all the different struggles that happened to them, okay. Then we take a step back and we look at like in a larger like political stance. Okay, what is happening with the Greek nation? What is happening with Antiochus who went to Persia to try to get money? And you see things kind of like from a broader perspective. Now, yet again, we see a broader perspective, okay? So it says, Judas heard of the fame of the Romans, okay? So at this point in time, it's not the Roman Empire, actually, it's the Roman Republic. So not everyone is aware that before the Roman Empire, there was the Roman Republic, okay? Before it was an empire. And at the time, they would elect a consul to be the ruler, and he would rule for 1 year. And then they would elect another one, okay? And the reputation of the Roman Republic at the time was it was very just, okay? So here, Judas is saying what? Heard of the fame of the Romans, that they are powerful and strong, and that they were willingly agreed to all things that are asked of them, and that whoever was agreeable to them, they established a friendship with them, and so they are powerful and resourceful. So he's thinking now, okay, in order for us to like end this cycle of battle where we keep fighting against the Greeks, and then the wars keep escalating, and they send more people, and it's like a back and forth. We need like help from a foreign nation. So at the time, the Romans had this very good reputation in the mind of Judas, okay, that this is going to be people that can help him. So he actually sends a delegation of people to the Romans to essentially become their allies. Like he wants to be their allies so that they would come and help them against the Greeks. And they heard of their battles and the successful works that they had accomplished in Galatia, how they subdued them and brought them under tribute. So again, the Romans, they were expanding, right, their empire. Right, which is why in the New Testament, okay, who is the one that is occupying Israel? The Romans, not the Greeks, right? So what we're reading here is part of the reason why, right? They were occupied by the Greeks. Judas went and he asked for the Romans to come and essentially them to be kind of part of the Romans. And so later on we see how the Romans are actually the ones in charge. Now they don't stay, innocent and humble and all these things that Judas is going to say about them. They become vicious and very selfish, right? But at this point in history, they had a much better reputation than later on, okay? And they heard of their battles and the successful works that they had accomplished in Galatia. We just read that. And that they had overcome places that were very far from them, and kings who came against them from the ends of the earth, and had crushed them and struck them with a great scourging, while the rest pay tribute to them every year. And they had defeated in battle Philip and Perses, the king of the Cetans, and others who had taken up arms against them, and had crushed them in warfare and subdued them. Okay, the Cetans, they were like a people that are part of Asia Minor, which is modern day Turkey. So essentially they have this fame, they have this reputation, and Judas is very impressed with them. And how Antiochus, the great king of Asia, who brought a fight against them, having 120 elephants with horsemen and swift chariots and a very great army, was crushed by them, and how they had captured him alive and had decreed to him that both he and those who would reign after him would pay a great tribute, and that he should provide hostages bound to an agreement. And that regions from the Indians and from the Medes and from the Lydians, from among their best regions, with those whom they had taken from them, they gave to King Eumenes. Okay, so essentially, the Roman Republic was spreading everywhere, right? And so the Romans, even though they conquered the Greeks, okay, like they conquered the Greeks in terms of like politically and geographically, right? But in terms of culture, they adopted the Greek culture, right? Which is why, for instance, you'll see in Greek mythology and in Roman mythology, there's a lot of similarities, right? Like in almost every god that exists in the Greek mythology, there's a counterpart in the Roman mythology. Like, for instance, Zeus, right? We've heard of Zeus. Who is Zeus? He is the head of the gods, right? In the Greek mythology. Does anyone know who the head of the gods in the Roman mythology is? What's his name?
Neptune?
Neptune? No, not Neptune.
That's a sea.
Neptune is Poseidon,
Poseidon.
right? The Poseidon in the Greeks is Neptune in the Romans. Okay, it was Jupiter. Okay, Jupiter. Okay, and all of the gods had like like their own. So essentially, the Romans adopted the Greek mythology and they made it their own. The Romans were very much more willing to adapt to and tolerate other cultures, whereas the Greeks were very much about this is who we are, and every time we conquer anyone, they have to adopt our culture. Which again, why the Greeks were trying to destroy the faith of the Israelites. Whereas later on, the Romans were not. The Romans were trying to, were allowing them essentially to practice, to offer sacrifice, to be circumcised, to do everything, right? All they cared about was the money. Send us your taxes and have allegiance to Caesar, and you're good. Okay, that's what the Romans cared about. The Greeks didn't want that. Well, I mean, maybe they wanted the money, but they wanted a lot more than that. They wanted the stadiums, they wanted the culture, they wanted you to worship our gods, they wanted so much more. Okay, so here the Romans are expanding, and they're conquering the Greeks. Okay, they're conquering them. And those who were in Greece wanted to go out and defeat them, but they became aware of this plan. And so they sent one general to them, and he fought against them, and many of them fell, and they led into captivity their wives and their sons, and they despoiled them, and took possession of their land, and they destroyed their walls, and drove them into servitude, even to this day. And the remaining kingdoms and islands, which at any time had resisted them, they destroyed and drove them under their power. So essentially, you see this picture where it's like they're willing to be friendly, they're willing to kind of like negotiate and be, good to these other people. But if you resist them, then they will crush you. But with their friends and with those who remained at peace with them, they maintained friendship and conquered kingdoms. Those that were near and those that were far off, for all those who heard of their name were afraid of them. In fact, whomever they wanted to help become ruler, these reigned. But whomever they wanted, they deposed from the kingdom, and they were greatly exalted. And of all these, none wore a diadem or was clothed in purple to be magnified in this. What does that mean in verse 14? None wore a diadem? What's a diadem? Crown. Right? So again, at this point, it was very democratic. I mean, as democratic as it could be at the time. There was a Senate, right? The people voted. There were there was a lot of elements of democracy. And again, they would vote for their ruler so he had a term of 1 year. Okay? Every year they would vote for him, right? A new one. Okay, would be the ruler, right? So there wasn't an emperor. There wasn't a person with complete authoritative power that could, wield power in whatever way as came later on. Right, in the Roman Empire, right? The Roman Republic, it was a republic from 509 BC to 27 BC. So almost 500 years it existed in this form as a republic. And in the year 27 AD, that's when they switched, and now they had an emperor. So right before the time of Christ, actually, is when they became an empire. Okay. So at this time, there was no empire, right? So there was no emperor. There was no one wearing a crown. So Judas's perception of them is that they were very humble people, right?
Before the time of Christ's service?
Before Christ's birth.
AD?
Because he was born in 60, the 27 BC. Did I say AD? Okay. Yeah, 27 BC. And also they made themselves a senate house, and they consulted daily with 320 men, continually acting as a council for the multitude, so that they would do the things that were right. Because Judas has such great perception of them, they're amazing. And they commit their government to one man each year to rule over their entire land, and they all obey this one, and there is no envy or jealousy among them. Okay, now you start to get to this point where he's been going on now 16 verses all about how great the Romans are. What do you think about what he's saying?
Too good to be true.
Too good to be true. Right? Like human nature is more sinister than even our best intentions.
Not just any human nature. This is human nature of people who probably did not know God.
Yes, they didn't. They were pagans. Right? In our politics, for instance, in our country, okay, no matter how good intentioned someone might be, there is the temptation of power. Right? The temptation of power is so strong then when anyone feels like they're in the position that they can wield a lot of power, it takes a lot to contain that. It takes a lot to control that, right? This is why you have people who maybe are very good people, but they fell into corruption, right? Not because they were corrupt from the beginning necessarily, but because the power corrupts. Like the saying that says what? Like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Okay? Like the more power that someone wields, the more likely it is for them to fall into some kind of corruption, which is why they have to be very, very disciplined, right? And even if you say that this form of government that this Roman Republic had now was everything that Judas says it is, but it didn't last, right? Like it reached the point where one person wanted to wield all of that power as the Romans expanded more and more and they became the greatest nation in the world. Now suddenly they couldn't continue like this, like somebody became corrupted and wanted to wield that power himself. And so Judas chose Eupolemus, the son of John, the son of Jacob, and Jason, the son of Eleazar, and he sent them to Rome to make an agreement of friendship and an alliance with them, and so that they would take away from them the yoke of the Grecians, for they saw they oppressed the kingdom of Israel with servitude. Okay, so he sent like this delegation, okay, of people to Rome to kind of explain their plight so that they would get help from them. And they went to Rome a very long journey, and they entered the Senate house, and they said, Judas Maccabeus and his brothers and the people of the Jews have sent us to you to establish with you an alliance and peace, so that we may be registered among your associates and friends. And the word was pleasing in their sight. And this is a copy of the writing which they rewrote on tablets of brass and sent to Jerusalem, so that it would be with them in that place as a memorial of the peace and alliance. So the Romans responded well, okay? And we're going to read like what the response is. May all be well with the Romans and with the nation of the Jews, at sea and on land forever. And may sword and enemy be far away from them. But if a war is instituted against the Romans first, or against any of their allies in all of their dominions, the nation of the Jews will bring help to them, just as the situation shall direct wholeheartedly. And those who do battle, they need not provide with supplies of wheat or arms or money or ships, just as it seems good to the Romans, and they shall obey their orders while taking nothing from them. Okay, so what are they saying here? This is the agreement between the Romans and the Jews. What are the terms of the agreement so far?
If Rome needs any help from the Jews to fight in battle, then the Jews are obliged. The Romans will provide supplies, they'll take care of their needs.
Now it says they need not provide with supplies of wheat or arms or money or ships. Okay?
Who's the they there? The Romans or the Jews?
The people who are doing battle. So see, look, it says, if a war is instituted against the Romans first, or against any of their allies and all their dominions, the nation of the Jews will bring help to them, just as the situation shall direct wholeheartedly. And those who do battle, they need not provide with supplies of wheat or arms or money or ships, just as it seems good to the Romans. Right? So it's saying that, like, those who are doing battle, okay, are going to be self-sufficient, essentially. Right? Those who do battle, they need not provide with supplies of wheat or arms or money or ships. That's how I read it.
Kind of volunteer, or they don't.
Like they're going to help, and they're going to use their own resources to help. Okay? Because it says, while taking nothing from them. They shall obey their orders while taking nothing from them. Right? So because the Romans are the ones that are being attacked, the Romans are the ones that are kind of like in charge, and they're enlisting the help of the Jews. So the Jews are required to help, they're required to obey their orders, and they will take nothing from them. Meaning they're not going to get any reward, and they have to use their own supplies, they own everything. Right? Essentially, you're an independent army, and we're coming to you for aid, and you're going to come and help us. Okay? And you're going to listen to what we say. Okay? But in like manner also, if war will have fallen upon the nation of the Jews first, the Romans shall help them willingly, just as the situation permits them. And those who give assistance will not be provided with wheat or arms or money or ships, just as it seems good to the Romans, and they shall obey their orders without deceit. So again, exactly the opposite, right? If the Jews are the ones that are attacked first, the Romans are the one obliged to help, okay, and they will be self-sufficient. And who shall be giving the orders this time? It's the Jews, right? So it's a very like equitable agreement, equitable alliance, right? You don't see here that the Romans are saying that they are, because they are the stronger nation, that somehow they have like a better deal for them than the Jews. Okay, it's like equal. According to these words, the Romans have made an agreement with the people of the Jews. And if after these words one or another would want to add anything to or take anything from these, they may do so as they propose, and whatever they add or take away, it shall be ratified. So essentially saying, if we want to change this agreement, whether the Jews or the Romans, we can come to an agreement and we can change this agreement. Moreover, concerning the evils that King Demetrius did to them, we have written to him. Now look at this. The Romans, having heard now all the things that King Demetrius did. Remember, who is King Demetrius?
The new king.
He is the new king. Okay, he was the rightful king. Okay, I think his father's name was Seleucus. Okay, and after Seleucus died, Demetrius was supposed to be king, but instead, who became king? Antiochus. Okay, so having explained, like the Jews explaining to the Romans everything that happened, so now the Romans are writing to King Demetrius, okay, saying, we have written to him, saying, why have you made your yoke heavy upon our friends and allies, the Jews? If therefore they come again to us against you, we will render judgment for them, and we will make war against you by sea and by land. Okay? You see, this is a very strong, decisive statement, right? Essentially saying, these are our allies. If you touch them again, we're going to destroy you in every way, by sea and by land. So this is enough to make anyone afraid. So it was a very smart move by Judas to go to the Romans and do this, and so far it seems that they're living up to their reputation. Okay. Any questions about this? This is like the shortest chapter in the book, only 32 verses. Yes.
I have a question. So, even though Judas saw that this might be a good deal, talking to the Romans and putting their alliance in order, didn't this still go against, I guess, God's will in a way? Because like before Judas' forces, they were beating the Greeks, even like 10 times their number, and they were still winning, even though the Greeks kept coming back at them. So, like, do you see what I'm saying? Like,
So one, in terms of like their ability to fight, the Greeks are going to keep coming with larger and larger numbers where it's going to become overwhelming. And so that's why he felt he needed the help. Two, it's not against the will of God because they're not offering to like appropriate the Roman culture and say, we're going to worship the pagan gods. We're going to do. It's just a military agreement saying, we're coming to you for military help. And the Romans are not asking them to do anything against their religion, right? So it's not against the will of God. It's just an opportunity that they had that God is providing to them, right? Like we shouldn't think in terms of everything that doesn't specifically have God in it is like somehow not from God. Like this can be from God. Like He gave them a good opportunity for them to make peace with a powerful nation that is willing to help them, and they don't lose anything. Like they're not being required to do anything against the will of God.
This is a period of prophetic silence. So like there were no prophets. Like the last prophet was Malachi.
Yeah, there's no prophets. Okay, like that's a good point. Like from the time of Malachi, which is several hundred years BC, until Christ, there were no prophets. Okay?
But they did have that law not to make alliances with the nations. Like,
Yes. But again, what is the spirit of that law? Like last time when we were talking about the Sabbath and what is the spirit of the Sabbath? What is the spirit of that law? Right? Here, this is like their entire survival depends on this. Right? Meanwhile, this is chapter 9. Meanwhile, when Demetrius heard that Nicanor and his army had fallen in battle, he again positioned Maccabees and Alchemists in Judea and the right horn of his army with them. Okay, who are these people?
The first group that was not faithful.
No. So Alchemists, remember Alchemists? Who is Alchemist?
Some form of counselor, I think.
He was a person who requested to be made a priest. Okay, and he was like used his position as a priest, like a corrupted priest, to influence the Jews, okay, and he deceived them. Maccabees, okay, Maccabees, he was another person, again, among the Greeks that Demetrius had sent to Israel to have a better understanding of what's happening there when he first became king, okay. And they traveled by the way that leads to Gilgal, and they set up camp in Mesaloth, which is in Arbela, and they occupied it, and they destroyed the lives of many men. So we're going to see more wars. In the first month of the 152nd year, they positioned the army near Jerusalem. And they rose up and went to Berea with 20,000 men and 2,000 horsemen. Now Judas had stationed his camp in Elasa, and 3,000 chosen men were with him. And they saw the multitude of the army, and they were many, and they became very afraid. And many withdrew themselves from the camp, and there remained of them no more than 800 men. Okay, so because they saw all this army, okay, they were afraid, and they left that area. And Judas saw that his army had slipped away, and that the battle pressed upon him, and that his heart was shattered, because he did not have time to gather them together, and he was very discouraged. So the people actually, the Jewish people, okay, who were following Judas, they actually became afraid, and they just deserted. They left, okay. And so Judas, seeing this, he was distressed about it, okay, and he didn't have time to gather them together. It was like a chaos happening, and he was discouraged. And so he said to those who were remaining, "Let us rise up and go against our enemies. Perhaps we may be able to fight against them," with the remaining people. But they dissuaded him, saying, "We will not be able, but let us try to save our lives and return to our brothers, and then we will fight against them, for we are but few." And Judas said, "Far be it from us to do this thing, so as to flee away from them. But if our time has drawn near, let us die with virtue on behalf of our brothers, and let us not inflict guilt upon our glory." What do you think about what he's saying? He didn't want to retreat. He didn't want to try to regroup or fight another time. He wanted to actually fight the army that was there, just with those people that remained, that didn't flee.
Was it being noble or was it being prideful? I mean, the numbers. It says they're down to 800 against 20-something thousand.
Yeah. I mean, we know that in the history of Israel, this has happened before, and Israel was victorious.
Yeah.
Okay. But in terms of what is the motivation of Judas here?
Nothing but guilt upon our glory.
I would say to inspire the people left,
Inspire them?
to come back.
Okay.
He didn't see the help of the Holy Spirit.
Okay, he didn't explicitly try to pray or ask God for anything. Okay. Anything else?
Maybe the guilt is that they are fighting, and let's not.
Escaping. I believe it's the guilt of escaping, being called cowards.
So it's possible that he because we don't see Judas running at any time. He's always fighting, and he's always victorious. He's always fighting, and he's always victorious. So it's possible that he's at this point kind of thinking that everything that they do is going to be victorious, right? Even when it's not necessarily the best decision in terms of the military strategy. He said, you know what? Well, we can beat them even now. Even just with those 800 people, we can beat them. Okay, so he's always very wants to move forward, wants to take swift action, not retreating.
But what about the Romans?
No, they're not active right now here. And the army moved from the camp, and they stood to meet them. And the horsemen were divided into two parts. And the stone slingers and the archers went before the army, and the first ones were all powerful men experienced in combat. Moreover, Maccabees was with the right horn, and the legion drew near on both sides, and they sounded the trumpets. But those also who were from the side of Judas, these also now cried out, and the earth shook at the noise of the armies. And the battle was joined from morning even until evening. And Judas saw that the stronger part of the army of Maccabees was on the right side, and all the steadfast in heart came together with him. And the right part was crushed by them, and he pursued them even to Mount Azotus. So they are winning. Judas is winning. And those who were with the left horn saw that the right horn was crushed. And so they followed after Judas and those who were with him at their back, right? So it's like they focused their attack on one side, all right, and they destroyed them. And then the other side, the left side, when they saw that they destroyed them, they like came behind them. And the battle was hard fought, and there fell many wounded from one side and the other, and Judas fell, and the others fled away. Okay, so Judas dies here, right? It's not the end of the resistance by any means, but Judas died. Now, again, this was his choice. This was his decision to go into this battle, like with only the 800 men. And even though they killed a lot, and it's not like they was like completely destroyed in the battle, but at the same time, Judas died in this battle. And Jonathan and Simon carried Judas their brother, and they buried him in the sepulchre of their fathers in the city of Modin. Okay, so this is his brothers. And all the people of Israel wept for him with a great wailing, and they mourned him for many days. And they said, "Such a powerful man has fallen, who accomplished the salvation of the people of Israel." But the rest of the words about the wars of Judas and the virtuous acts that he did, and his magnitude, have not been written, for they were very many. And it happened that, after the death of Judas the iniquitous began to emerge in all the parts of Israel, and they began to encourage all those who worked iniquity. Okay, so what's happening now?
When Judas died, they all basically just started doing their own thing, a lot of evil things and not following the law anymore.
Right. So there was a group of people here that's called the iniquitous, right? The sinners. There was a group of people that were in the nation. Maybe they were quiet because they were afraid of what would happen to them if they made some noise, if they began to do what they really wanted to do. But now that Judas was gone, they believed that now they have freedom to go and do what they want to do, and they began to encourage other people to sin. This is again showing us like that first group we talked about, where like the people that really wanted the Greeks to win, okay, the battle. So Judas was like a symbol, right? And when Judas was gone, everybody felt like, okay, like this whole resistance is going to fail. Now we have freedom to do whatever they wanted. Now, they didn't recognize that actually God was the reason that they were fighting, and God was still there. Like the reason Judas was winning was because of God, not because of Judas, right? It was because of God. So we're going to see now what's going to happen, but essentially, God is still present. God still wants the Jews to have victory, and they're going to continue to fight. In those days, there occurred a very great famine, and the entire region handed itself over to Maccabees. And Maccabees chose impious men, and he appointed them as rulers of the region. Okay, so there was a famine, and so there was a group of people that kind of surrendered to Maccabees, and he assigned people to be responsible for that area. And they sought out and persecuted the friends of Judas, and they led them to Maccabees, and he took vengeance on them and abused them. So you see now kind of like the tide is turning. Like whereas before everything was like Judas and the Israelites were successful, now that Judas had died, there was like a period of darkness. And there occurred a great tribulation in Israel such as had never been since the day that there was no prophet seen in Israel. Right, so it's like such a difficult time after Judas's death, and you see that like this is a kind of a characteristic of life. Is like there's sometimes there's times of light and there's times of darkness. Even though God is present all throughout this, from the very beginning all the way to the very end, God is present, and yet He allows there to be times where there is victory, and He allows there other to be times of defeat. Okay, and so if you look at it and you say, well, why is God doing that? Well, He's not giving an answer. He's not saying, well, why specifically? If God wanted to expel the Gentiles, because God wanted the Jews to have their nation, and He wanted them to practice their religion, and He sees that people who are very pious and righteous people and have good intentions want to defeat the enemies, well, why doesn't God just do it? And yet He allowed this struggle. like this tribulation to happen for a reason, that they learn something from it and they continue to have faith and believe in God despite the difficulties of doing so. Right? Like, if God did absolutely everything we wanted all the time, then we would have no faith. Right? Essentially, like, God is just like a machine. We tell him something, he does what we want. He's like a genie. He does whatever we want him to do. But when we see that there's times of darkness, instead of going to the idea of saying, well, you know what, God doesn't exist, or God doesn't love me, or God is, far away, instead we say, no, we don't maybe understand why God is allowing this, but we still believe that God can grant us victory. We still believe that God is victorious and that God is good and present, but we have to have patience. We have to wait. And that's what they did, and they're going to be successful again. And all the friends of Judas gathered together, and they said to Jonathan, since your brother Judas has fallen away, there is not a man like him to go forth against our enemies, against Maccabees and those who are the enemies of our nation. And so now we have chosen you in this place on this day to be our leader and commander in order to wage our wars. And so at that time Jonathan took upon himself the leadership, and he rose up in the place of Judas his brother. And Maccabeus knew of it, and he sought to kill him. And Jonathan and his brother Simon knew of this, and so did all who were with them. And they fled into the desert of Tekoa, and they settled by the water of Lake Asphar. And Maccabeus knew of it, and on the day of the Sabbath he himself arrived with all his army across the Jordan. And Jonathan sent his brother, a commander of the people, to ask the Nabateans, his friends, to lend them their equipment, which was abundant. So they're seeking help from this group, the Nabateans. And the sons of Jambri went forth from Medeba, and they captured John and all that he had, and they went away in possession of these. Who is John? John is another of the brothers. Okay, so John is one of the brothers of Judas and Jonathan and Simon. Okay, so they captured John. After these events, it was reported to Jonathan and his brother Simon that the sons of Jambri were having a great marriage celebration, and that they would be leading the bride, a daughter of one of the great leaders of Canaan, out of Medeba with great fanfare. And they remembered the blood of John, their brother. Okay? And they went up and hid themselves under the cover of the mountain. So they killed him. They killed John. And so here, there's this group that's going to have this marriage celebration, so they decided to use the marriage celebration as a distraction, to use that opportunity to go and to fight them. And they lifted up their eyes and saw, and behold, a tumult and a well-prepared multitude. And the bridegroom proceeded with his friends and his brothers to meet them with timbrels and musical instruments and many weapons. And they rose up against them out of ambush, and they killed them. And there fell many wounded, and the remainder fled into the mountains, and they took all their spoils. Okay, so they swarmed and ambushed this marriage celebration when there was a lot of people there, and they defeated them, took all of their spoils, and they fled back into the mountains again. And the marriage celebration was turned into mourning, and the voice of their musical instruments into lamentation. And they took revenge for the blood of their brother, and they returned to the bank of the Jordan. And Maccabeus heard about this, and he came on the day of the Sabbath all the way to the coast of the Jordan with great force. And Jonathan said to his own, let us rise up again and fight against our enemies, for it is not today as it was yesterday or the day before. For behold, the war is before us, and truly with the water of the Jordan here and there, and the banks and the marshes and the woods, there is no place for us to turn aside. Therefore cry out now to heaven, so that you may be freed from the hand of your enemies. And they join together in warfare. So here Jonathan is he's making a prayer to heaven, and he's saying we are now trapped, like as opposed to before, like maybe where they had the option to fight or not. Here they are like trapped, and they said we have to fight them, okay? And they're asking God to help them in this battle. And Jonathan extended his hand to strike Maccabeus, but he turned away from him in retreat. And Jonathan and those who were with him leaped forward into the Jordan, and they swam across the Jordan to them. And there fell from the side of Maccabeus on that day 1,000 men, and they returned to Jerusalem. Okay, when it says, and they returned to Jerusalem, it means Jonathan returned to Jerusalem. And they built fortified cities in Judea, and the fortification that was in Jericho, and Emmaus, and Beth-horon, and Bethel, and Timnath, and Pherathon, and Tephon, with high walls and gates and bars. And he stationed garrisons in them, so that those in Israel became trained in warfare. Right? So it's like they're setting up more fortifications, they're doing more training. And he fortified the city of Bethzur and of Bazara and the stronghold, and he stationed auxiliaries in them with supplies of rations. And he took the sons of the leaders of the region for hostages and put them in the stronghold in Jerusalem under guard. Okay, so he went to like the different areas and regions around them, and he took the children, the sons of those leaders, and he put them as hostages to get like leverage and influence over them. Now in the second month of the 153rd year, Alchemist, remember who is Alchemist?
The only holds to be a priest.
Yes, he's the corrupt priest. Alchemist instructed that the walls of the inner court of the sanctuary be destroyed, and the works of the prophets be destroyed, and he began to destroy them. At that time, Alchemist was struck, and his works were hindered, and his mouth was closed shut, and he was weakened with paralysis, so that he was no longer able to speak a word, nor to give orders concerning his house. And Alchemist died at that time in great torment. And Bacchidus saw that Alchemist was dead, and returned to the king, and the land was quiet for 2 years. So what happened to Alchemist?
He died.
How did he die?
Probably have a stroke. Paralysis.
Paralysis, okay, but why did that happen to him?
He was trying to destroy the works of the prophets of the temple. I mean, so what he would have done would have been something that was harmful, very harmful to the future of the kingdom. Maybe it was literature, works of literature, or prophecies.
Yeah, so he was destroying the temple, right? Like he was destroying the temple, and while he was doing this, he was struck. What does it mean he was struck? He was struck by who? By God. He was struck by God, right? So in a lot of this book, we don't see like direct intervention of God a lot. We see like God working through people, right? But here we see God directly working, you know? And it's a reminder to us, like sometimes even when we struggle and even when we go through dark times, we can still see God working. I mean, we wonder maybe why God, if you can work in this, why don't you like work and fix the whole thing? But God didn't do that. Like God in this moment, like you see, he is present, he is aware of what's going on, he is protecting his people, he is protecting his house, but he is not completely like destroying the enemy, right? He is allowing the enemy to remain so that we can fight against him. And this is something very important when it comes to like our spiritual life, right? When we ask God to help us in our spiritual life, right? He doesn't come and just snap his fingers and suddenly we like have no sins and no temptation and we live like saints, right? He gives his aid, okay, but he allows us to continue the struggle because the growth is in the struggle, right? Sometimes we imagine that if we got to the goal, to the end, that somehow this would be the best, right? Because we think that's maybe what we want. But God is allowing the struggle for a reason. The struggle is where we grow, right? It's like when you go and you work out, the struggle is in the work, the growth is in the working out. Right? Here, there is struggle happening in Israel, and God is allowing it for the growth of his people. And so even though God is intervening and God is doing things, he is not completely ending the struggle or ending the battle. He's wanting the people to endure, to have faith, to go through the situation and be stronger at the end of it. Okay, so it says, when Bacchidus saw that Alchemist was dead, and he returned to the king, and the land was quiet for 2 years. Okay, so remember, Demetrius is still the king. Bacchidus, this man, he returned to the king, and like they stopped the war, okay, for a time, for a period of 2 years. And all the iniquitous considered together, saying, behold, Jonathan and those who are with him live in quietude and confidence. Now therefore let us bring forth Bacchidus, and he will capture them all in one night. So they went and gave counsel to him. So after these 2 years were over, okay, the people, they wanted to rise up again and to continue this battle, because in the end they want to destroy these people. They want to destroy this resistance, this rebellion, so they can conquer this whole nation and it be part of the Greek Empire without any kind of resistance. And he rose up so as to advance with a great army And he secretly sent letters to his associates who were in Judea to seize Jonathan and those who were with him, but they were not able, for their plan became known to them. So he had like spies, okay, that were around. They tried to get the spies to apprehend Jonathan, but it didn't work. And he apprehended from the men of the region those who were the leaders of this malice, 50 men, and he killed them. So Jonathan apprehended these people who were like rising against him, and he killed 50 of them. And Jonathan and Simon and those who were with him withdrew to Bethbasi, which is in the desert, and he repaired its breaches, and they fortified it. And Bacchidus knew about it, and he gathered together all his multitude, and he reported it to those who were from Judea. And he came and made camp above Bethbasi, and he fought against it for many days, and he made machines of war. What did we say the machines of war were?
Like catapults or kind of like
Fireballs.
Yeah, like catapults or battering rams, or those things that to overcome a fortress. But Jonathan left behind his brother Simon in the city, and he went out into the country, and he approached with a number of men. And he struck Odomera and his brothers, and the sons of Phasiron in their tents, and he began to slaughter and to increase in forces. In truth, Simon and those who were with him went forth from the city and burned the machines of war, and they fought against Bacchidus, and he was crushed by them. And they afflicted him greatly, because his counsel and his meetings were in vain. And he was angry with the men of iniquity, who had given him counsel to come into their region, and he killed many of them. But he decided to depart with the remainder into their country. Okay, so why is Bacchidus angry?
Because it's people who, his informants, or that group that was existing, the workers of iniquity, they failed in their either their intelligence was not good enough or not accurate or whatever the case. It cost him, so therefore he took vengeance upon someone.
Right, very good. And Jonathan knew of it, and he sent ambassadors to him to arrange a peace with him and to restore the captives to him. So now Jonathan feels like Bacchidus is in a position of weakness, and he wants to actually make peace. And he accepted it willingly, and he acted according to his words, and he swore that he would do him no evil all the days of his life. So now this is not the first time that the Greeks came to the Jews and they offered peace. Okay, in this case, it was the Jews who offered the peace, and now we see that Bacchidus, the Greeks accepted it, right? And they promised to do him no evil. And he restored to him the captives which he previously had given from the land of Judah, and he turned back and went away into his own land, and he no longer drew near in order to enter their borders. So the Greeks are retreating. Okay, the Greeks are retreating from Israel. And so the sword ceased from Israel, and Jonathan lived in Michmash, and in that place Jonathan began to judge the people, and he destroyed the impious out of Israel. So what do you think? Do you think this peace is going to last?
No.
No.
this is chapter 9,
This is chapter 9, yeah.
5 more chapters to go. And another book.
Seven more chapters. Yeah, 7 more chapters. So yeah, no, there's going to be more that we're gonna see. So, any questions or comments about this so far? Okay. Glory be to God forever.